with episode number 63 of the Critical Fools podcast. This week we will be reviewing really recent film. Just came out. It looks like on September 4th of this past year. It's been about 3 months. But this week is The Whale. This is a Darren Aronofsky film. I apologize if I mispronounced that. This is, I believe, the second film, correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, that we've reviewed of his, the first one being Pi. I can't remember if we reviewed any of his other films in his discography. But yeah, I saw this in theaters about 2 weeks ago or so. I thought this would be an interesting discussion to be had. So kind of want to get your initial thoughts, Chris. What do you think of this film?
Well, first of all, I will say that my preference is going to be to not pick movies that are in theaters. It was actually
That's fair. That's fair. I thought it might be easier to see, but going forward, we won't do that.
But I think it's fine for special occasions. But before we get into my initial thoughts, obviously with COVID, I actually probably haven't been to the theaters since like 2019. So I didn't realize there was all these amenities now. Like I ordered popcorn and they delivered it to me.
They delivered it, yeah.
I was like,
Did you like that? Did you like the experience?
Yeah, the problem is that I see that like what they've kind of done, at least the one I went to, I bet like newer theaters when they build it from the ground up, they're much better. But I think they kind of like it was a normal theater and they kind of like repurposed it because it looked kind of old and run down a little bit. And the service was fine, but like because it's just a movie theater. But I was like, they could spruce it up. But I think they've had to evolve because we haven't talked on this pod, but like the movie industry when it comes to in-person
experience
movies it's been hurting, yeah. But regarding The Whale, I think, I had seen the trailer. I had heard some rumblings on the film, and I think it's mainly because this director has such a high bar. He's made actually a lot of iconic films that people still reference to this day. And I don't think we reviewed Pi, but I don't think that's one of them. I think people think of more of Black Swan and Requiem for a Dream. But I came in with some, understanding that this guy knows what he's doing. And I think a lot of if I had to say, like, I could see how this movie made people a bit uncomfortable. I can see how it was attacked probably for the wrong reasons. On the whole, it's a good film, actually. I think it was trying to tackle very human issues that I think we all have in some form or another. And we've all seen for sure, I bet. We'll get into like some of my issues later, but I would say like one of the things stylistically I appreciated, which now when I did some reading, it made sense that it was based on a play. And I'm actually interested to discuss later I didn't see the play, but I wonder if it did better as a film than a play. Because I'm thinking because I've been to Broadway, I think the play would have dragged on a little bit. And also like, I think the fat suit that the actor used was actually pretty decent. I mean, I think I've read only one critique that maybe the arm should have been bigger, but but I wonder how that would have played like in real life, like in a play, could you really mimic that? And also some of the eating scenes, you can tell there were some special effects, some editing involved. How would that play? But we can talk about that later. But this is actually to show you how solid and viewable, at least once this film is. I actually was curious enough to do that extra reading. That doesn't happen with all the films we review, obviously.
Right.
But I would say on the whole, I think there were times in this film where I really felt like the film was pushing too hard some of its points. A little bit, it could have used some nuance, subtlety, but I feel like it was like a play. It's the closest thing I could recall of recent memory, Alexis, of like a play, a film that looks like a play, feels like a play, right? Because the whole film really takes place in one room, right?
Mm-hmm.
And plays are often like that. And so that was also different, But I'm actually curious to ask you, in this film, because I've read also a lot of people saying like they felt really emotional during certain parts. I guess, did you ever hit those points? Like emotion, like really feeling like, I mean, I was reading that people cried or they teared up at certain points. And I mean, I didn't personally. I was just curious if you did, but
I didn't. I just felt a lot of discomfort at many moments in this film. I don't know if you felt kind of the same, like especially with some of the eating, you could tell like especially with the main character, he was sort of struggling right with his addiction and his coping to eating, and he knows he's really killing himself, right? And so part of the issue with that is just like he at a certain point he's just like so overweight that he's like, what's the point? Why am I going to change now? It's not going to like make any difference. So you just see like you can tell like at one point he's sitting at the desk or like on the counter of his kitchen, and he like puts down a candy bar, and then he like starts googling his blood pressure, whatever, and it's like chronic heart failure, and he just like gets mad, shuts it off, and just eats his candy bar. And
Yeah.
I could see like parts like that. I'm like, man, you can empathize with like sort of the despair that the main character was going through.
Yeah, it's this move. The thematically, in my opinion, this film is about human emotions, human nature, coping. We'll talk about that, I bet. But I think more importantly, the way man I took away watching this film actually was in life you make decisions, and they're not always perfect decisions. Sometimes they are very, emotional, or you're going through the motions, or you're in a weird spot. Like I'm gonna quote one of the lines in the movie: "You're in a weird spot in your life," and I think the hardest thing sometimes in life is to face those things, like to say,
Mhm.
"Look, I made this decision. I thought this was going to be the outcome. It wasn't. I chose this over the other thing." And we'll get into the examples in the film. But I think the reason when I read a lot of threads and comments, why this generated, I think, an emotional reaction to many people is that I think that universal theme hit with a lot of people because they can
Mhm.
probably connect with a lot of the characters, archetypes, but I think more importantly, that theme of like, okay, maybe it wasn't he left his daughter and the eating and stuff, but like maybe there's some other decisions you made in your own life, whether that's as small as, taking a job, going to this school versus that school, breaking up with somebody, whatever that is.
Mhm.
Um, and you look back in your life, especially as you get to the end, because often people like think about their goals in the short term or how they're doing it, and I feel like unfortunately, and it's like almost like the chicken and the egg kind of problem, where like you only really know if you made the right decisions or if you're really happy with your life at the end of your life, and that's
Right.
the truth. And I think that's kind of disconcerting to people, and I think you see this with Charlie, that at the end he is not dumb enough. And that's the thing too. Like we always like rip characters or like, oh, or like whatever social media, like this person is like totally, he doesn't, he's not self-aware. Charlie came across as very self-aware at the end
Mhm.
of what he had done. Especially we'll get into that scene where like, the mom, Ellie's mom and him have that talk. That was very revealing that like he knows what his life is, what it became, and the only thing he's holding on to is that his daughter can do better and like be, and we'll get into that. It's an interesting, the Ellie topic was an interesting debate I saw online as well. But like that, that's where I give kudos to the film. And one of the strong points is that a lot of films now are afraid to tackle that. I'm ignoring Blockbuster. I'm even saying like other, let's say, indie films, and they tend to push more of an agenda versus like maybe share like a human story. Because the other critique I saw of this was like, oh, they only had one diverse character. I was like, okay, like we got to stop.
Well, it was that they said they didn't really have many fat people like in it. It was just like this guy who had to wear a fat suit was another criticism. Look, a lot of this is just like they talk about representation. I think that's important to a degree, but it's like you're not going to be able to suffice everything. And like a lot of the criticisms I saw from this film from like major sort of mainstream publications was that it was being like fat phobic. It's like, yes, I don't think this I don't think they were necessarily trying to criticize like fat people or their lifestyles, just trying to explain how it could impact uh, the many aspects of that sort of lifestyle and how it affects other people, right? And I think that's really what they were trying to show. And it's not that they were just focusing on them, right? They had parallels. There's obviously the main character storyline. You had Ellie's storyline, the wife's, The fact that he was just not only fat, but he was also gay, so that brought a very interesting dynamic. You had his and the nurse and sort of her situation and dynamic with him, and then even the random a religious kid, right? That was I actually thought that was a really interesting storyline as well, and how that sort of tied into the film. So it was like very dynamic, and everyone was dealing with their issues, but everyone, for some reason, everyone tends to fixate and get really angry when some of the storylines involve like more people who are more on the obese side. And I'm not sure why that is, or why people don't necessarily have that reaction.
I think it's because a large majority of America is obese, and it's hard to face that truth.
Yeah, I mean, it's not everybody, right? There, it's multifaceted, but a lot of it is lifestyle.
Yeah,
whether people want to admit that or not.
Yeah. Anyway, circling back, yeah. So going back to what I said earlier, the theme of coping. Well, we can start with Liz's character, right? So she is the nurse taking care of Charlie because Charlie's want to go to the hospital. It's revealed that like Charlie's the love of his life, quote unquote, was her brother, who was raised in this, let's call it church, quote unquote, but not a church that I would be associated with. But and I think I actually, talking about those two siblings together, what was interesting, so with Liz, what was interesting is that she has that powerful line that I'm the one that's going to take care of him. I'm like, I've seen this pattern with relatives, when they have
especially with like elderly. Oh yeah, they get very possessive.
And their identity becomes caretaker, becomes their purpose. And then she obviously has a lot of resentment because I think in her view, the conflict of her brother being gay and religion and God killed her brother. What was also interesting, and I'll get into why I think that, but what was also interesting is that her brother, well, at least described, to your point, it's interesting how a character that we never see is a character.
Yeah.
And he slowly also tried to kill himself. Well, he eventually did it one move, jumping off the bridge, but he was not eating. He was doing the polar opposite of Charlie, right?
Right. So, it was an interesting.
So he was becoming anorexic, and Charlie was overeating. But she clearly, when she talks to Thomas especially, she clearly feels that like it was this conflict of losing my train of thought here, but of being gay and being religious. Because it looks like she even says it, right? She describes him as like he was super devout. Like he was a missionary, he truly believed, and his dad wanted him to get married, and that's where he realized that there's just this huge conflict. And later there's a conversation between Liz and Charlie where Charlie says, like, I thought I could be enough for him. I thought he could just love me and I could just love him. But I think the reason the Bible was in his room and like super like, Thomas notices, right? Super like, highlighted and detailed is because he could not reconcile what he was taught in New Life, this church, with his homosexuality and God, who he needed God in his life. It was very apparent. And that all got warped and it destroyed him. And I think that's very interesting. Honestly, this character that was not on screen, it was actually one of the more compelling characters that were part of the film, actually, because you see that through him, that like it's not so like black and white. Like we like to especially label in our current society, like, oh, the religion is bad because it's anti-homophobic or it's homophobic and stuff like that. But you see this homophobic character actually wants a relationship with God, but he cannot.
Homosexual character, not homophobic.
Sorry, homosexual character. Sorry, thank you. He has a dilemma. He wants that relationship with God, but at the same time he wasn't taught any way other than what he was taught by his dad or his parents.
Right.
I found that completely sad.
Yeah, I mean, this film wasn't the most sort of uplifting. It was just very interesting in terms of some of the storylines and how they were woven together. Yeah, like to your point, this really did. When I was watching it, I was like, this does feel like a play. like even the style, the choice, the fact that it was shot in one room. That's what it was. It was very reminiscent of. Trying to think. Well, it was just like they. I remember reading the play Fences in high school, and later on that got turned into a movie. Kind of had that same feeling where it was like definitely different acts throughout, but it was like to your point, it was very depressing at times.
Yeah, so just to wrap up with the siblings, with Liz at least specifically, like I'm curious to get your thoughts on like, I guess how do you view the topic of coping in general? I guess like what,
Oh
like
man,
we all do it in one way or another, but I guess I'm curious on two levels of like, you know, where have you seen yourself kind of do that, or where do you think you've seen it like really become like in your life, like because we know this theme is universal kind of thing, like where like did this film adequately you think touch on like how you've seen it and how you think people unfortunately approach it?
I think they showed the worst sides of coping in this sort of film. I think especially when people get depressed or they go through stuff, you can go through it through sort of eating, or like sometimes like people like eating comfort foods, right? Done that before. I think everyone kind of does. I don't always think that's necessarily the healthiest way, but some people when they go through negative emotions or they have bad things, sometimes they channel that into more productive ways of coping, if that makes sense. Some people really hit the gym. Some people try to get in shape, or deal with it in like kind of healthier ways, or for some people, they tend to, like Thomas's character, really gravitate towards religion or church to try to pull them out of like, some of their addictions. Like it kind of depends. I think this film tried to show like the worst cases that humans can go through coping. Because I was trying to think, I was like, is there any healthy ways that they sort of describe there? And I was like, nope, definitely not. I mean, what did they show? They showed, overeating. They showed, possessiveness and in caretaking of somebody, and really enabling them in their lifestyle choices that did not lead to good outcomes. And then for the daughter and the religious kid, it was weed, right? So I might be missing some, but those weren't necessarily the healthiest ways of trying to cope. And man, I will say I've seen many people turn to either like alcohol or narcotics to try to deal with like stuff that they just want to keep putting off. I'm sure you've seen the same.
Yeah, and I think like those are, like you said, the extreme examples, but people also will consume.
Well, not just extreme, but the negative examples.
Yeah, and then there's other ones that are negative but not as extreme, but like you'll consume like certain type of TV show content or social media content to feed your certain bias.
IG, right? Sometimes when you're like, especially you hear this with some models, like they're feeling sad or insecure, so then they'll just go and post, right, to try to get that dopamine hit, and that's another way of like coping.
Yeah, Liz's character was, and honestly, you see the very twisted relationship she has. She's Charlie's friend, and I found it interesting that she kept saying go to the hospital, but then she would feed him like these
Subs,
mayonnaise filled subs. It's like, man, that's so twisted, but it's like it's human nature. Sometimes it's like you care about this person, but you care about them in a certain way.
But you enable them as well.
Yeah, you enable them because I think I like using this term. It's like it's a twisted love. It's a twisted relationship. Like
strange love.
What I did appreciate about this film is that everybody likes to focus on twisted love, like romance relationships, which is like more of the mainstream. But we think of it.
Family.
But people, I think, forget that there could be twisted friendships and twisted other types of relationships.
It's beyond that. It's like I would say that it wasn't just friendship with her and Charlie. It was more like she was
codependent.
No, like family. I mean, Charlie was married to her brother, or like they were significant. So it was beyond that. I mean, she was even estranged from like everyone else in the family because they were religious.
Yeah, it was a lot of
Charlie's the only one she really had.
It's codependence, right? So,
which is sad because you could tell she never was able to move on with her life because her whole identity was built around taking care of Charlie.
Or before her brother. She referenced that as well.
Right. Both of them.
Yeah. So I found that to be, I mean, all the characters in this film actually are very multidimensional. It's the strength of this film. And got to give it credit there. Anyways, moving on to
Oh,
I
hold
don't know
on.
if you want to jump into anything, but
I do have a question that we might want to get into because I haven't heard this discussed a lot, but I always thought that that was interesting that sort of suddenly. Do you think that there was any problem with the way Charlie and well, aside from all of the cheating and adultery, right? Did you think there was a problem with the way that Charlie and Liz's brother like actually met? Because like I got kind of it was interesting. They didn't really go into it, but it was kind of grooming vibes to an extent because Charlie was his teacher.
yeah, I mean, it's my personal take. So I have two things to say here. One is my
All right, go
personal
ahead.
take, and one is my what I've seen in the wild and are more of a cultural point. My personal take is it is not too dissimilar to when you have an exec get involved with a entry level engineer or engineer level position, and we see this with Bill Gates, right? He ended up coming out that he was cheating on his wife with like entry level marketing or something women. I think the reason why it's tricky with the grooming is that they don't say if he met, like they say university, but we don't know. It's not told to us like if it's like freshman year or if it's like his senior year.
Oh, but you know he was in his class because they hung out in like office hours. Because
Yeah,
you say that.
yes, it's definitely for sure unprofessional on Charlie's
Yeah.
part. I don't know. I would only lean grooming if it was like his freshman year, but if it was like a little bit later,
Well,
it's
why
still
would hold on? Why would that be grooming freshman year? You're over 18.
because my understanding is that the brain isn't fully developed until 25.
Right, but so if it's 19, it's not.
No, 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 no. I mean, like it would have to be. He would have to be like a senior year, maybe 21 or 22, and it's still borderline to me. I feel like, and Charlie's much older. It's definitely the thing when I think of grooming. I think of somebody priming them up over like
Yeah, I mean,
years. I wouldn't go as far as grooming personally because like it's like when I view the definition of grooming, it's like when you're priming somebody over years. I don't know if that's the
yeah.
case here. I did find it highly unprofessional, and I think a bit warped because the power imbalance and
It
also
is work because it's his teacher, and so that's
yeah.
where it kind of becomes an issue.
Because for instance, like think about this, change the situation. Like you said, it's the power imbalance. So like let's say they met, they had both. They I don't know what was Charlie into reading. They had both joined a book club. He was 20, let's say 20, and he's I don't know how old he would have been. And they hit it off there, and they
I
started
wouldn't
dating.
view that as a problem. No,
Exactly.
I mean,
Yeah.
I wouldn't view that as a problem if they're both like single, right? Obviously, there's other dynamics within Charlie's life, but I'm
Yeah.
trying to separate those two things.
Yeah. So to your point, it's to answer your point about grooming, at least me personally, we don't have enough details, but I will say that if it was over years and it was like I said, the same like class and I would lean that way, but from everything we're kind of told, he might have been towards the end of his college tenure. Again, I don't know like those
We don't know.
details.
We don't know that. It was just I found it interesting. Is like, oh yeah, it was the first time was when he went into like my like he came into my office hours. I was like, oh,
Yeah.
that's a
And
lot.
I mean, you've been in more of the university system than I have. It's highly unprofessional
Yeah, of course.
yeah. And you question the power dynamics there actually as well. I will say that like you're right. I haven't seen too much discussion to your point, and
On that aspect, which I found interesting,
and
especially in sort of the heightened cultural, dynamic that we have. I found that interesting. I didn't really see a whole lot of that discussion.
and this perfect segue to my second point. What I say about culturally, and I think
Mhm.
the reason it wasn't discussed and the reason it's not viewed the same way is because it's a homosexual relationship. Like if you were to have this with, let's say it's a student, even if she's whatever 18, 20, even if she was 22, it would have been put like there would have been a lot more papers on this. I mean, a lot more articles on that.
Yeah, I find that interesting though because I mean, years ago, Milo, the gay, very conservative, controversial figure, he had some statements where he kind of got canceled and shut down, which was kind of weird too. I don't know if you remember that whole
Oh,
controversy.
I remember because what killed him was basically saying on a live stream that it's okay at 13. I was like,
Was it that young? I can't remember the whole
oh,
dynamic.
it was super young. For like, I never liked the guy, but for me to be like, that's just very
Oh, okay,
disturbing.
yeah, that's they're not comparable then at that point. I couldn't remember
I
the
was
exact
like,
dates.
no, the what because he would I see how the unfortunately how our
But like
media is, right?
yeah.
If he had said 17, 18, he might have been able to survive, but he said something mad young, like 14 or something.
Oh wow,
And
yeah.
I
I
was
see.
like,
I agree with you
and
then.
honestly, that's why we've never heard from him again. Because even the
Yeah,
his base was like, yeah, dude, I'm gonna take a big step back here. Like,
they walked back real
sorry,
quick.
we could defend you on all your other takes of like race and gender roles, but when it comes to this, we're taking a big step back, and we haven't heard from him since. He's pretty much he canceled himself like an
Oh
idiot,
yeah,
dude.
I can't remember the last time I really heard from him.
He canceled himself because I forgot what the context was, but I think he was saying like, oh, it was an age of consent conversation or something like that,
Oh yeah.
and he was trying to say that like it's different for gays and men, and I was like, what?
No,
I was like, this is
definitely
crazy.
not, bro.
Yeah, so it's unfortunate. I have to push back here. It was not similar.
No, you can't. 'Cause I couldn't. It was years ago, and I couldn't remember the exact details. Like that was the one where I was like, "Well, he did get canceled." I was like, "Oh," like when you brought that up, I was like, it's not quite the same. You're right.
Yeah, a lot younger. It was honestly, I now you remember. I'm remembering this. I was like, this is why I didn't like the guy. This guy, I knew he was disturbing, dude.
Jeez. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Never mind. To your point, though, yeah, I think if the dynamics were or was a heterosexual relationship, there probably would have been a lot more pushback when the female was younger. But to your point, and like I agree, I wouldn't have had a problem with it if they like met at a book club, right? If they were both single, right? I mean, take the wife and the child aside.
Yeah, it's the power dynamic. Like whether that's in the teacher student relationship or the exec with the entry level copywriter, that's where it's a problem, right? Because is it really a real relationship or is it because there's the power imbalance, And it's
Mhm.
but yeah, it's it's one of those things where I think it's kind of glossed over in the film, like it's used as a the wife brings it up the most, the ex-wife I think brings it up the most, but
No, the daughter does too.
yeah, the daughter is too, yeah.
I mean, and so this is another thing that we could talk about, which struck me where I was like, oh man, was when she's first dealing with her dad and she goes over and they're like talking about it and he's like, I don't want to talk about it, but then and they try to move on like everything's good and he's like, nah, like I still remember. She's like, I remember a lot of things. I remember being 8 and mom was away and you brought over your boyfriend for like steak dinner, blah, blah, blah. You guys were having a great time. And he's like, how do you remember that? And my whole point was just like in the film as the character, it's like, why would you do that? Why would you be so reckless to bring, like, he might be the love of your life, but why would you be so reckless as to like really do that in front of your daughter? Like, be more that was the whole point. He was just being selfish and not.
Well, I don't think they did the lovey-dovey, but I think
Dude, he brought him over for dinner and like.
yeah, I think but it like he probably played it off. My suspicion is that if we were to, they don't show us this, but my suspicion is that he played it off like, oh, I mean, it's
Yeah,
still
but
weird.
you knew later on, and you could put 2 and 2 together. Kids are not dumb.
That's what yeah, as I said, kids, even though she would piece it together probably as she got older. I think she could intuitively sense that like it doesn't really make sense for my dad, a teacher, to have a student over for dinner.
Right, and that's the only one he did.
Exactly, and
on
then,
a 101 when her mother was away.
Yeah, and also she noticed the vibe too, even though they might not have been like kissing and
Sure,
stuff.
no, but you can feel the energy.
Yeah, but yeah, that's but I think it's because often, especially with like at least in my experience, I think new parents or parents in general, especially new parents who are like, let's say they in their 20s, because
he's not new, dude. She was 8 at that point.
No, like that. I mean, I'm including. I mean, like parents who have like one kid in their 20s, they tend to learn with that kid, and I don't think he was aware. Like he just probably thought that this girl his daughter would forget or whatever.
Well, that was the other thing that like hit me. Oh, when like, and this was a dynamic between the wife and like her ex-husband, when she's like, I know you never really loved me. You just wanted me to have a kid. I was like, oh, that's a lot, man. Like there were a lot of lines and dynamics where like, whoa, this is getting heavy and deep.
Yeah, it was very interesting. Like
I'm sure you've known or like know people, especially being in Mexican culture. I'm not sure about Vietnamese because they can't relate to that. Definitely know a couples that are married where the husband's definitely gay, or it's come out and it's been revealed. But culturally, like back in the day, you couldn't reveal that, or like it just wasn't acceptable. So they went around like actually just being married to somebody, which is crazy. Kind of like living. In reality, is really living a lie.
Yeah. No, I mean it's tough, and I think Charlie mentions this is one line where he says like he was in a weird spot in his life when he met.
Yeah, and they never really delved into that.
Yeah, they never delved into that. So I don't know if it was because he was having his identity crisis, or I don't know. Like we can only speculate. But what I found interesting with the ex-wife and his dynamic is that even though, and I think this is the complexity of relationships and the complexity of being human, which is that's why there's lots of literature and books, about human nature, is that like there is like some anger, there were some shots, but at the same time
you can still see the connection between them.
Yeah, like they didn't hate each other.
Look, I'll give this movie the style, the acting credit. They made the characters just so multi-dimensional. Because even those interactions, I was like, wow, that's true. I'm sure there's a lot of couples that kind of go through that. Oftentimes you see like portrayal of like when someone hates each other, they hate each other. But these guys, it was kind of like hate, but there was still concern. Like you could feel all the different emotions that they were, and how they still cared about each other.
Yeah, it was probably the more realistic. Like when people think of bitterness, they often think of like the old chicken hen, like, I hate life.
Mm-hmm.
But honestly, I bet you for most people who end up their age, who are in that dynamic, like that kind of bubble where like, their best years are probably behind them. That's probably like the most realistic depiction of, I would say, bitterness I've seen, where like you not everything was bad, not everything was good, obviously, and you kind of wish certain things just broke your way, but it didn't. And you have the life you have. Because that's what it felt like. Those scenes, especially that scene, was like, it felt like it was like the old adage, like if only 2 or 3 things had just been different, this would have been great. This would have worked out. Yeah. And it didn't, obviously. We saw the film. But that's something that I think a lot of people do hit in their like 50s and 60s. Like, if I had this had just worked out this my way, maybe things would have been different. Who knows? But people think like that,
Right.
Yeah, I those scenes with the ex-wife and Charlie were like really good. And,
there were a lot of good dynamics. What did you think? And so this is what I want to segue, because I want to get your thoughts on this. What did you think about the sort of random character at first that was trying to I'm talking about the kid who said he was from New Hope, but he really wasn't. He was just trying to say, what did you think about him?
Yeah, and then I want to get into my favorite. I have a question for my favorite character, but
I mean, if you want to ask your question first, we can do that.
No. I think it's better if we talk about Ellie towards the end, because I found her to be. But anyways, with Thomas, I found it interesting. Well, first of all, high level, I found it interesting that Ellie picked up on that something was off about him.
He was fake. She could smell it.
Yeah, she was really good with that. Like she could tell that like it was that New Life didn't do door to door anymore. That he was lying, basically. I think what you said earlier in our podcast, this episode was correct. That like he had fallen to this path of drugs. His parents had kind of like not disowned him, but like said, "What the hell are you doing?" He had a crisis of identity, and then he found, like you said, some meaning and trying to do this because he shared the confession with the he was doing missionary work and he stole the money, blah blah. Which is wrong of him to do, but like he was struggling with trying to do good in the world. And actually, what was interesting, and when I finished
that was such a good like, I don't know, I just really liked that aspect of his background.
Yeah, what's interesting is that what Liz told him in the beginning was probably what was going to happen with his life, even though he had ups and downs in this film and this moment. I think he learned a lot from it. I think he probably learned more from Charlie than he realized, is my sense. So Liz says in the beginning of the film, right, like, leave here, you're just gonna do this missionary work, then you'll, get a job, get kids, get married, get kids. I actually think that he goes on to do that, actually. And I think it's like he was sort of like he had the right intent, in the sense that like Charlie, when he first met, was in trouble. Oh, that scene was wild when he was like, you know, doing his business, and then he needed help.
Oh, at
Um,
the beginning
yeah,
is the opening scene.
yeah, and
Yeah, I was like, wow, where's this film going if you're starting off like this?
yeah, but you see that like Thomas is it's still at a point in his life where like he believes the words of God, quote unquote, in the book, but like he doesn't know how to actually actualize it because he keeps repeating things. And you see this when the him and Charlie have this peak moment, right? Where like, you know, he's telling Charlie, like, you know, you could still be saved, you could still be, you know, in God's good graces. And then the
This is
breaking point.
after it's revealed that his daughter basically like and oh yeah, we'll get into a lot with the daughter, but after like basically she uh either intentionally or inadvertently helped him like reconnect with his family, right? So
Yeah.
she's like, Ellie did that, and but then he's like still trying to. He's like, you could still be saved and all that.
Yeah.
Is that the point you're talking about?
Yeah, because I want to talk about this one because I'm trying to highlight what I just said earlier. My evidence for like he has the right intent. He wants to you know, believe, you know, the Bible, but like he you'll see when I wrap the thought in a bow, you'll get it. The breaking point is when, you know, Charlie asks him like, oh, it's because we were gay, why, you know, everything's the fault of us being gay, and he's like, yes.
Mhm.
And that's when like they had the whole breakdown, and I think that shows Thomas's almost like naivete that one single issue isn't the reason why Charlie and Liz and Ellie are in this dynamic, you know.
Right,
um
it's multifaceted.
and I think Thomas could never get that because he was so black and white, you know, and righteous in the end. And actually, Ellie called him out on it, like saying, like, in the end, all you missionaries become righteous and not very likable. And he turned into that because initially he is kind of likable because he seems very like low key, humble, but then he starts feeling the righteousness of the Bible, quote unquote, and he starts thinking he's a preacher, but he's not. And he doesn't have any real life experience or any. He doesn't know their situation, right? He's just met them, you know.
Oh, it's interesting because he tries to play the role of like passive empathy in a way where he's like, no, like you're fine. I don't view you that way. You're human. Everyone's in God's eyes. But then in that, remember, like they're having, I can't remember the whole conversation, but he's like pressing and moving towards him, making Thomas uncomfortable. He's like, come on, tell me how you really feel. And he's like, what do you think about me? Blah, blah. And he's like, yes, I think you're disgusting. Blah, blah, blah. And like he finally like goes off. But you could see that that Charlie stops pressing him at that point. What I found interesting about that was it kind of reminded me, and I don't know exactly what Charlie was feeling, but it reminded me of that article I like sent you a while back where they were talking about femcells. And for those of you who, everyone's aware of incels and sort of that community, but femcells are basically this community of women who basically say that they just don't get any attention from males because they're quote unquote on the lower end of the beauty standards, right? And amongst other things. So they generally don't, they usually have never dated. There's like huge communities of these people online. And what they say is they get annoyed with a lot of people peddling them with sort of this positivity movement because they're like, dude, no one is really acknowledging our situation or what they really think. Everyone's trying to pretend. I think that was the same thing with Charlie. It's like everyone's like knows the elephant. No pun intended. I'm not trying to say anything, but the elephant in the room of like his situation. But everyone tries to soft pedal around it in many ways, right? I'm sure that because you're only seeing this at the later stages of his life. But I'm sure a lot of people have never really wanted to address it and never really say what they really feel. But it's always passive. Kind of like in the way that when the pizza delivery guy stays with him and he finally looks at him with disgust, but he never really says anything.
Yeah,
and it's like unspoken. And I think Charlie's kind of appreciative because he's like, well, at least you're being honest.
Yeah, and actually honesty is that theme is actually throughout his teaching courses, right? He talks a lot about writing.
Just write me something real. Write me something honest.
And Ellie as well, right? Like he wants people to write and really write what they think, what they feel, what they truly believe, and even if it's not great, right? Even if it's not pretty, because Charlie, I think, like I said, what I said earlier, right? Like most people like want to sometimes attribute people's failings because like they weren't self-aware, but Charlie's actually more self-aware as a character than I think a lot of the other characters.
Super self-aware.
Even though he has one blind spot, which we'll get into, but But yeah, like you said, he pushes Thomas, and I agree. Like he wanted an honest reaction out of him because,
Mhm.
like I said, not most people in a social circle.
Is it
walk
what?
out-
Also, his whole personality, his interactions didn't seem honest.
Yeah, and then as well as like when you're, a student, you're just trying to impress the teacher with your paper. Like you're not, you might think the class is dumb and stuff. By the way, on the topic of the students, I think a lot of things missed because they focus on Charlie's character, like when he reveals the camera, but you actually can see other, because I feel like this has to be intentional because it's, nobody's
Mhm.
gonna be looking at this. If you look at some of the other students when he reveals himself, some actually start laughing, scoffing, and taking pictures of the screen and stuff.
Right.
I think a lot of people missed that, but I was like, damn, like that.
Really? I got that right away.
Well, I think so, I think a lot. When I was reading threads, I think people were like so focused on the center box that they didn't look at the periphery. It was an
Mhm.
interesting observation, though, just to highlight that.
Yeah.
Um, it shows you how inhumane we can be sometimes,
Oh,
but
absolutely.
especially if like over behind a screen, right? But yeah, I mean, I think Thomas's arc, there's his own story, but I think he ties in nicely with, I think, the other theme of this film, which is like actually saying what you think versus just trying to sugarcoat it, and
Mhm.
play it off like, oh, whatever, or like, this is the best we could do, or let's not try to hurt your feelings. Because Charlie's, for some reason, like he's really big on that I'd say his creative side. Like he's big on like art and honesty and stuff like that.
Mhm.
I got nothing
Uh,
else on that topic.
no, I mean, yeah, you kind of summed it up pretty well there. So I think this is a good time to transition to Ellie. So, what do you
Yeah,
think
so
about her character?
I want to open up with this loaded question. Do you think Ellie is evil or is she good? Or
That
what
was
kind
a
of mix? What's the mix she has?
great
The reason
question,
I
and
bring it
that's
up is that
so hard.
that was like when I was reading some Reddit threads, like that was like
That was
topic number one.
I'm sure.
Yeah, yeah, it
Even
was.
I will say I can't figure it out to this point. I think that was the when we talk about nuance in filmmaking and sort of crafting characters. This is what we really talk about. It's really hard to tell. I wasn't able to pierce it out because I was like, you can't tell if she's being a rebellious teenager or if she's just inherently sort of self-centered and doesn't really care about anyone else and she'll do whatever she wants, or if she really actually in her own way cares and just wants to like in her own way do its best and help the people out in sort of her twisted like teenager way. It was hard to tell. I'm not even sure. Do you have any thoughts?
I do because I spent a lot of time thinking on this because she was my
Go
favorite
ahead.
character.
Go ahead.
For not just because she's a good actress and a lot of respect, but
Mhm.
I actually think that her character, like I was saying earlier with this film, like she is just superhuman. Like I think we like to think of people as inherently good natured or bad natured, but I think she's just in many ways a victim of her circumstances. So, for example,
Sure.
I think that we'll talk about the ending in a sec, but I think at the end, I think you genuinely see that she has this. She cares for her father in some weird, whatever way whatever you want to describe it as.
She expresses it.
I think also, even though she's really nasty to her dad and
Hmm.
to her mom too, but to her dad, she still, even though she'll say like, I hate you. We talked about this off the record all the time, right? Look at their actions, not their words.
Hmm.
Even though she says all those things, she still will write in the notebook. Even if it's like 2 sentences or a paragraph, which I found like interesting because like she clearly is not dumb. She knows that the power balance here is like her dad wants to curry favor here. She could have done whatever.
Hmm.
But at the same time, though, I think because of her broken household, unfortunately, and all
Hmm.
the baggage that came with it, I think she's also very manipulative and like just kind of like sinister. Like I know Charlie wants to believe that, oh, she
Yeah,
sent that thing
I
to,
would go with jaded.
yeah, she nihilist, right? Like
Hmm.
because Charlie Mann is like, oh, she did it to save him. That's why she sent it. No, she did it to F with him. She says clearly to him, like, I'm just messing with you. I like messing with you.
Yeah.
And there are people like that. They just like, messing with people. And like
Uh huh.
that's their nature. And some people
Yeah.
view that as evil, but I just view
I,
it as like a victim of her circumstance because I think she's can be
yeah.
both caring. But what I found interesting about this discussion is this is maybe the power of this film. I'll have to give kudos again. People were so convinced of one or the other. She's evil because of XYZ. Another guy, no, she was just, messing with Tom because she was really into him. All the hints are clear. I'm like, what hints? No reply, obviously. I'm really thinking like people see what they want to see. And I'm thinking that's what Charlie was too. Like he saw what he wanted to see. And I was just like, this film is so good because people do this all the time, right? They see what they want to see.
Well, it was even like, let's tie it into last week's film where it was like How to Be Single. When you give the demonstration by the bartender where he's talking and he's like telling, I forgot what the character's name. Is it Alison Brie's character?
Yeah, it's Alison Brie's character.
Yeah, when he's like, people just want to hear what they want to hear. And he's like, I break out with you, blah, 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 but I still care about you. I still love you. That's so sweet. And it's like all this selective hearing.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think people do this with people. They don't even sometimes realize it. But because obviously what I found interesting is that Charlie has one perspective, even though he's been out of the picture, and the mother has a different one.
Mm-hmm.
And my psychoanalysis take was like, the truth is probably in between. Mm-hmm. She's probably not this monster that the mom thinks she is, but she's also not this angel that the dad thinks she is. And she's just, like I said, very human, where her complexities are very multi-layered. And I think it's because she just didn't really have parents, if the way it's described, right? The dad left to pursue the love of his life. The mom never really recovered, probably psychologically. She has an alcohol addiction problem. And Ellie had to grow up in that environment and like kind of figured it out. And like Charlie, it's funny, like it's selective, right? Like to your point, because he even says to Liz, I'm worried about her because it looks like she has no friends. Mm-hmm. She's not doing good in school. And these are all kind of like yellow red flags that you have for teenagers.
As a parent, yeah.
Yeah. But at the same time, she tried to save Tom and she genuinely cares about people. There was a picture of her, I think, killing or taking a picture of a dead animal. Like I was like, I don't know. That seems like she needs to see a therapist.
Oh yeah.
But I found that intriguing. I found her character. And so like what you're left with is the question. The reason this is, I think, an important question is because Charlie has so much invested in her future, right? And like the ex-wife says, right? Like I gave her what I could. You're giving her the money. We did the best we could, and we'll see what happens. And Charlie needs to believe, like, he tells her, right? I need to believe that like she's gonna be good. She's gonna be better. Unfortunately, going back to a film that I really like, Upstream Color, sometimes the cycles of life destroy you. And I wonder if Ellie in her own way will grow up to be similar to her parents in some ways,
Yeah, sometimes you break the cycles too.
Unfortunately, I don't think she's pure evil, but I don't think my money was that she wasn't going to break the cycle. But
that's true. But this part of the film is like, you don't know what'll happen.
I'm very confident.
That was the whole point. Okay. Yeah.
I'm gonna use a hot take here.
Peter Zion out here with his predictions for Zion.
She unfortunately becomes the combination of both her parents, which is very unfortunate.
Yeah. In all likelihood, she probably will have somewhat of both. Yeah. Anyway, was there anything else you really wanted to jump into? We kind of covered. There are a lot of characters. Well, we covered in this.
Yeah, I guess like to wrap up a little bit, I would say I have a few other questions. One was like, what was your favorite character? I think the other question I had for you was like, what were the problems you had with this film? There's obviously no film is perfect, so. But yeah, go ahead. Then I'll answer them if you want. But
my favorite character?
I already said mine. Actually, I said mine was Ellie. So
that's hard. Honestly, I just think the most underrated character, or like the one that was unexpected, based on like the twist, was Thomas for me. I just thought his naivete, his sort of growth, and then when you like understand some of his background and what really happened, really like I think a lot of people go through this frustration who've been raised religiously, and we see it. I mean, we both went to Catholic school, right? So we've seen it before where it's like, I've seen this where he's like, we'll go preach on the corner, but we're not really doing much, right? We're not doing like a whole lot. We should be doing more. Like what we're doing doesn't really mean anything, right? Just handing out pamphlets or stuff like that. We've seen this, like, it hasn't been one of my criticisms for like a lot of kids who are like grow up religious. You see them go on these like mission trips to like, parts of like Asia or Africa or Latin America for like 3 days, and they're like, yeah, we went over there to build homes. Really? you built homes, but you've never like done any construction work before. It's just like at the end of the day, it's like I could empathize with Thomas and like you wish you could be doing more to like save or helping your like different communities in different ways for like outreach, but it's like a lot of how do I say this and not be like super like I'm not trying to be offensive, but you see like some people act like they're doing a lot and in reality they're not really. It's I could see Thomas's frustration where he always wanted to do more for like his faith. I thought that storyline was pretty interesting and kind of compelling. Now he was very multifaceted because then he also stole and then he became estranged and he was trying to redeem himself, like sort of the redemption arc of trying to like save the main character Charlie. So I found his character pretty fascinating in many ways in tying in. I don't know.
So about the issues that you have
Dude,
with the
just
film.
because, yeah, I mean, part of it was just because I was like, I couldn't quite figure out how we fit into this film because this is a random kid from the church, right? And so I think that's why I found his character and I was like, actually, this dude tie in, and then like it's sort of revealed little by little over time. Where it's like Liz, you find out pretty quickly, like she's the typical archetype caretaker who was the sister of the main character's like the main character's lover, right? And then the wife, how the daughter's related, but I couldn't really piece together until like mid to like the end, like how exactly Thomas like actually tied into this.
Well, it's kind of like the pizza guy, right? Sometimes in life, it's just because you're in the same spot as another person. It's a bit like one line I liked from Thomas's character when he said like he feels like he was meant to be here because when he was there when he needed, like, is that coincidence, whatever, is that destiny, who knows? But it's sometimes in life like we don't appreciate like our network effects, and it's just because like we made a decision years ago to attend a certain school or do a certain job, and those are the people you meet and the connections you form, and like he knocked on the door, even though like Ellie pointed out, New Life no longer does that.
Right.
But and that changed his life probably too, because he was like you said, his parents. She said the confession, and we don't want to rehash it. But so I'm curious about anything you want to, any problems you have with the film, though.
Trying to think about like actual criticisms that I had. It did seem a little like, I mean, you got to the point and you brought up like the overeating scenes, and I got it. It seemed like they just rehashed that a few too many times. I did agree with you. After like the third time, I think that was the most egregious like example of overeating. I forgot exactly what triggered that, but it just seemed like it was kind of a repetitive storyline. Like to me, it's like, all right, we got the point, right, of like what Charlie was struggling with and like why that was happening. It felt like you were kind of bashing the audience over it. Is there anything else that I really had an issue with? Honestly, not really. I thought this film was just like pretty interesting. They obviously tried to keep, I don't know what it was with the color tones, but a little darker, a little gloomier. Like even with the way that the lighting, that Charlie's apartment was sort of directed and casted from just an aesthetic point, just seemed kind of gloomy all the time. But I think that was the tone. I thought that was interesting and kind of like a little. They were really trying to set the stage there. I thought the acting was phenomenal. Like I was trying to think of like, did I dislike the acting from anybody?
I forgot. I have one more question before I jump in, but
go ahead.
No, I was gonna say. So there's been a lot of discussion on the editing. When he pulls out the oxygen, did he die in the couch? Did he actually step up and die? Everybody knows that like that last scene, he's passed away. Like he floats, he dies. But people debate whether is that all in his head? Did he actually get up to get with his daughter, or did he die on the couch, or did he get up and just die like standing, or die like laying? Like
I don't think it matters. I think the whole point was he was trying to come physical, but he's actually crying.
I think he died on the couch, and actually, oh, that's the other thing too. Did Ellie really turn around and read the paper? That's a good debate actually. Did she really turn around, or was that in his head? Because the thing is, at what point was in his head? Because you don't
know. You don't know.
Yeah. So I'm
never know.
my opinion that I think
Well, I mean, to me, it doesn't really matter.
for me, I think she walks throughout that door and he dies alone with the oxygen tank. That's my interpretation.
It's dark, but it's all speculative, and it's hard to tell.
Yeah, it's hard to tell. I don't think we'll get a straight answer, but that's the interpretation I will carry away from this film. This man is you'll
delusional in his head.
No, you.
That's what you're saying.
I'll have my rant at the end.
But that's what you're saying.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting how certain films, certain shows say a lot about a person based on their interpretation.
Anyways, I have to get. I have to do my little monologue, but go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. Well, I'll just finish up. I thought this. Like, I had very few necessarily issues with this film. Because I thought that the characters were very well written. I thought the acting was phenomenal from like all across the board. I did agree with you when you talked about it because I was like, this is just like with this like bird overeating scene. I was like, this is just getting excessive. Like you're beating the audience over the head with like his struggle there.
Well, it lost its effect. I told you, I started laughing. I was like, okay, this is now funny.
I didn't laugh, but I'm like, okay, yeah. I was like. We get it. That's like his big struggle at the moment.
He needed one scene, really. He just needed one.
Maybe two, just to get it. I mean, that's fine. But I mean, he struggled several times with it, and like, you're really seeing it. Yeah, but overall, I thought this was a really interesting sort of discussion. I enjoyed the film overall. Yeah, despite like it's like heavy and not like super happy topics that it wanted to discuss. But yeah, overall, I give this film a 9.
Yeah, so I have so I'm gonna so I have two things to say really. One is more like on some of the aspects of the film I thought was the issue, and then my own personal opinion that always affects my score. But anyway, structurally, my one of the one we just touched upon was I thought the overeating was overused. Like I told you, like I just said earlier, like one time I started laughing in the theater. I think people were like shocked because I was like, this is just too much. Like, you gotta be kidding me. And I can't actually feel, because I know what he really wants me to feel is like this uncomfort, like you were saying. But at a certain point, I was like, I'm not uncomfortable because I've been seeing this. You know,
some people were though.
Yeah,
I could tell in the audience.
And I think that was that's definitely top of mind.
So it's like, and I guess to my point before you finish is like, was that just your interpretation, or is that how everyone else feels? Because if everyone else was uncomfortable, then maybe that's just on you.
No, I think it's just I saw through his. I'm not like a novice movie filmmaker.
Here's the elitist, Chris.
It's coming out. It's coming out now. Like I see through these charades, dude. Okay. I am not your casual. I should be writing for the New York Times. Dude. Anyways, the
the New York Times had a bad write up on him, but they called him very fat phobic.
Yeah, that's this superficial analysis. Anyways, but I think that's like top of mind. I think also this is not really this film's problem. I'm not gonna hold it against it. I'm not just gonna bring it up that I've noticed that, and this makes it's nothing that we can control, but Hollywood always likes to paint religious characters in a certain archetype, and this was no different. He's supposed to be unlikable, even though I didn't think it was unlikable, but I saw a lot of sentiment that like, oh, Thomas was the character I disliked. Like you said, the most underrated was probably partly because a lot of people, they already have a predisposition bias against, let's say people of that ilk. And a lot of people were definitely saying how they were the least favorite character was his. That's why I asked you that other question about.
Really? I mean, I just found his character fascinating in many ways.
Yeah, a lot of people. If you look on threads, you'll see a lot of people rip into him because.
What do they dislike about his character exactly?
Again, it's not him. I think it's more of
the archetype.
It's the archetype, yeah. And I wish Hollywood wouldn't always just use the same archetypes. I think there could be more creative ways to.
But I would say, to be fair, it wasn't the typical archetype with his.
No, I thought he was one of the more fascinating characters as well. But I think unfortunately, Hollywood, and especially good directors like Darren, have such a power. They should, be more. Maybe more intentional, but
okay. Let's go with this. How would you have liked his character to be scripted a little differently? That would have been more impactful.
I would have liked to seen a line after he yelled at him that he's disgusting that said like, you know what? Basically, I mean, I'm not a screenwriter, but something of the ilk of like looking ashamed, but then saying like, you know, I'm glad we met. I still think God can save us both, and then walk away. I don't like how God
That
is
would have been
always.
interesting. That would have been interesting.
I just hate how like personally how like religion is used as a tool, and it's kind of like I don't want to say ridicule. That's not the right word, but more like it's not taken. Hollywood never says it's that they never takes it to the seriousness of like people who are actually religious would take it.
Oh yeah. You're talking about the Logan Paul analysis.
Yeah, but
I
also
don't know
like
if have you seen that controversy?
no, I have not.
Oh yeah, he ridiculed his co-host for like having a religion or like being religious, and he's like, dude, I've never seen anything bad about like gay people or anything like that. And he's like, but you're associated with people that how could you do that? And it's so superficial and almost like such bad faith that it's insane.
Because keep in mind how like I'm not saying New Life was a good example, like for
No. But there's a spectrum.
yeah, but it's usually painted with a brush. But that's like such a I'm not even gonna hold it against the film because like that's just a general critique I have of.
Yeah,
Hollywood films.
but what I will say too though is I have met religious characters or figures who are like that. Like
Yeah,
it is a stereotype, but there are some people like that, but not everybody who is religious is like that.
yeah, and now I have to go into my biased because I had the question of what we didn't like about the film. I have to now insert my biased analysis here now.
Go ahead. But I will say if they had that little twist with the character, I thought that would have been that would have been really good.
Now with my issue is actually with Charlie. So I understand that we're supposed to have this empathy and stuff, but at one point I was like, okay, so you're telling me I'm looking at just objectives. You're telling me this is the guy that walked out on his daughter. Forget the ex-wife, fine. Walked out, sent money, and like Ellie even calls him out on it. Like you could have been somewhat involved more. She didn't want me near you, but like I don't know if you really care about your child that much, you would do something.
He reached out towards the end of his life, right?
Exactly. When he knew it was over. All right. So
you could have done that 3 years earlier.
Liz calls him out on like that one time where because he made it seem like he was poor. He should have been more upfront, and she was struggling in the snow. And
that was good.
And she broke because she's like, I went to the snow to get your food, and my car broke down. He's like, I did offer to pay, but he's like, I didn't take it because I thought you were poor. And
they had some good twists in this film with that.
Yeah, so I'm going like, okay, so I understand everybody's kind of selfish, but like, okay, so he leaves his daughter for her because he prioritizes the love of his life. He also doesn't tell his friend, supposedly friend, family, whatever hybrid you want to describe her as, the truth when she needs maybe here and there stuff. Because he could have had the tough conversation. He talks a lot about honesty, but he's never honest with people and himself sometimes. So he talks about honesty. Yeah, he talks about honesty with like, oh, be honest. But he's like, he doesn't. Why didn't he have this talk with Liz about like, look, I have money, but it's not for me. I want to die. Accept that. You know?
Well, my issue with it, my biggest issue, and I've seen people do this before, is they think money can cure all.
Yeah, that's another issue. And so I'm watching this film, and I'm like, okay, I know like we're supposed to have all this like it's like I said, I give it all this praise, but I'm going like, you missed the one thing. Your central character, I have zero empathy for. Like,
but I think that's the whole point. I think they were trying to make him in many. I mean, to be fair, with everything, you're like, well, a lot of these scenes, are up to different interpretation, and they're so multifaceted. They have a lot of hypocrisies.
But you'll be surprised. A lot of people had empathy with Charlie. But anyways,
but that's what did you say? It's people want to see what they want to see.
Yeah, and then I'm gonna even go further. And so then I'm thinking also while watching this, like, okay, he does all this stuff. He also like has the audacity to say that line to Liz, right? Like, I thought I could be enough for your brother. His name was Alan, right? I thought he could just love me, and I was just like, oh, because just loving you and not having his parents or his religion wasn't important too. Like, come on,
right?
Like the world doesn't revolve on your.
Well, yeah, to a great extent, he is an incredibly selfish character, and many times in his life.
And I was like, yeah, I'm done with you, dude. And then when he died, I was like, yeah, of course he dies at the end. And that's why I choose to believe, fine, to your point, there's no proof that his daughter walks out on him and he just dies on the sofa.
Man, you have so much to say on this film. I'm really curious as to what your score is, because if it's like a 6, I'm gonna slam you.
Nah.
This is like the most opinionated I've heard you in a long time on a movie.
Yeah, I actually stuck with an 8 out of 10.
Okay, that's fair.
Yeah, I said like this. I have to be fair to, but I think the film could have taken that next step if it was able to get me.
I agree with you.
If it got me to really be conflicted with my empathy, I would have been like, this might be like 9.5, 10, you know. But it failed there, and I think that's why. Honestly, I think you're right. The hot takes on this film were wrong. But at the same time, I prefer
what hot takes?
The fat phobia, or it's
that's just so superficial.
And also,
I was like, this is so dumb.
I haven't seen every Darren Aronofsky film, but like his worst one, I was like, I don't think so. This is actually pretty good. So
when you told me this is his worst film, I was like, really?
Granted, he's only made really good films usually, so it's kind of tricky. It's a high bar, but like it was good. And
yeah, but when you say worst film, you're like it should be no. You can be like it's one of his like average films. Like for him, okay, I could probably see that. But when you hear worst film, like that means like it was a complete dud.
Yeah,
like in my mind.
Yeah, these are the hot takes that exist, but I think it's because it's a movie.
I don't know. A lot of the criticism I've read was just right here. Yeah, it was from Roxanne in the New York. Roxanne Gay at the New York Times, talking about how she just didn't like this film because she was just struck that there were only 4 or so fat people in the audience and no fat people on the screen on stage. Which I'm like, this is your criticism from like after watching this film?
He gets paid $200,000, I bet, to write that. Anyways, but yeah, sorry to wrap up. I gave my score, but that was kind of like one of my bigger personal gripes with the film is that in the end, Charlie, I understand you're going for a message and stuff, but I mean, to make your character so kind of like not great as a person, like was like kind of like I can't, like, I guess what I'm trying to get is at one point I stopped. Maybe that's why I was laughing at his binge eating, because I was probably like, I'm not even remotely emotionally connected to you. Like,
right.
Like if you die in the next scene, I'm gonna be like, okay.
You're moving on at that point. Dang.
Yeah, exactly. And so that was the kind of like because I think the film should have at least tried to keep me with the tug at least a little bit. But at a certain point, I'm looking at it, I'm like, okay, dude. Like I said, I don't want to repeat all the points, but like there's just probably others I missed. Where I'm like, if that's the point, fine. But like you going back to overuse, then you overuse that tool.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you overuse that tool of like getting me to view him as selfish, very selfish. I'm like, well, you gotta throw me a bone here, because like, why am I gonna root for anything for this guy? I mean, Thomas should tell him he's disgusting, not because he's fat, but his actions.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and I that's why I told you my interpretation of that ending is what it is, and I'm going with that always. But you're right, I appreciate it, because this movie I was watching. I was like, I was fired up. I was like, okay. You know, I'm not gonna. I mean,
well, all right. So you're saying it didn't make you uncomfortable or necessarily have more empathy to the characters, but it did. It like evoke certain emotions out of you in many ways.
Yeah, that's why I think the movie is good, because it does, dude. I think if I had to really summarize why, it's because Charlie in many ways represents. I mean, this is problematic language, but like he represents in many ways what I consider to be like the anti-archetype of what I consider to be a good man. I'm gonna use the term man here, not to offend any transgender.
Ooh.
And I think
that's a hot take. All right.
And I think he's I have never actually seen it depicted too often, maybe so blatantly, that kind of my juxtaposition of that. Like, you know, I was you know, and what's interesting is that's why I changed my pick. We're gonna review a film that is closer to what I think is the archetype of you know, what a man can be. you know,
Mhm.
even though it's a bit mythical and whatever, but you know, you have to go with films are not perfect. But that's why I think probably why I really like you said, got me having these type of feelings and thoughts and analysis,
Right.
like, because in the end, like, you're right, like everybody's gonna look at the fat thing, which is just a symbol of, you know, him wanting to die. But I look at all his actions, like you said, and I went like, man, he was right about one thing. His daughter deserved a better father. And I was like, yeah. I was like, at least, and that's what killed me the most. You were self-aware and I knew that. I was
Yeah,
like,
of course.
man, you're killing me, man. If you could have just been delusional, I could have accepted you, dude. But no, you're only
No, you know.
delusional at the end in your fantasy that your daughter, like, you know, read to you and maybe cared about you. I was like,
Oh man.
so that's it. That's my drop the mic. That's it.
All right, all right. Yeah. Fair enough. I mean, that's one interpretation. Anyway, if you enjoyed our commentary for this week's episode, please like and subscribe to our channel, and let us know if you have any suggestions for films that we should review, and leave those in the comments section. So we'll definitely be sure to get to them. Anyway, until next week, and we're out.